It began with a routine training exercise, or so they thought. In Southern Comfort, 1981, a group of National Guard soldiers wade into the Louisiana bayou armed with blank rounds, maps they barely understand, and a dangerous overconfidence in their own authority. Their boots sink deeper into the muck with every step, and soon, so does their sense of control. What starts as a simple march devolves into confusion, paranoia, and something close to war. But there are no uniforms here, no flags, just shadows in the trees, and a growing sense that someone is watching. Directed by Walter Hill, Southern Comfort never announces what it's really about. It doesn't have to. The metaphors are embedded in the mud, the fear, the silence. Critics called it a veiled Vietnam allegory. Hill denied it. Audiences debated. But even without consensus, the film pulses with the anxiety of a nation that's lost its moral compass and its footing. The production itself was as treacherous as the story. Shot in real swamp territory, the cast and crew endured leech-infested waters, collapsing equipment, and raw physical exhaustion. Reality bled into fiction. Tempers flared. Accidents weren't staged, they simply happened. And Hill? He let the camera roll. More than 4 decades later, the film still divides viewers. Some see a survival thriller. Others see a study in collapse of power, of structure, of identity. One thing's certain, Southern Comfort isn't comfortable. It's claustrophobic, hypnotic, designed not to entertain, but to unsettle. Here are 20 weird, often disturbing facts you didn't know about Southern Comfort, a film where the real enemy might not be the one holding the gun, but the one pretending it isn't loaded. Fact Hasson, a live round was used and it wasn't a mistake. In a film where soldiers are issued blanks to mimic authority, the line between real and staged should be clearly drawn. But in one unforgettable scene in Southern Comfort, that line wasn't just crossed, it was shattered. During a moment involving the chaotic slaughter of a wild hog, the animal used was not a puppet. It wasn't CGI. It wasn't spared. According to multiple sources close to the production, the pig was real. The bullet that killed it? Also real. Accounts vary slightly on how the decision was made, but what's clear is that the scene wasn't achieved with tricks. The animal was cornered, agitated, and ultimately gunned down on camera as part of a sequence meant to show panic overtaking the soldiers. And while some crew members considered it a calculated effort toward gritty realism, others called it unnecessary, even cruel. Walter Hill reportedly defended the decision in private as a reflection of the film's honesty. Others weren't convinced. There were no formal protests. This was before animal welfare groups monitored every production, but the air on set reportedly shifted after that day. Crew morale dipped. Conversations grew quiet. The moment still exists in the finished film. It passes quickly, but for those who know the truth behind it, it lingers. The sound, the impact, the lack of comment. Because when a film about pretend soldiers fires real bullets at a living creature, it raises a brutal question. What are you willing to kill to make a movie feel real? Fact hash 2. The breakdown behind the scenes wasn't fiction. Actors trained to portray exhaustion, to simulate fear. But on the set of Southern Comfort, they didn't have to reach for either. The Atchafalaya Basin, where much of the film was shot, is beautiful and absolutely unforgiving. Every step was a gamble. Uneven terrain, waist-high waters, swarms of insects, and unpredictable weather. But what made the experience truly punishing was Walter Hill's philosophy of immersion. He didn't want performances. He wanted reactions. Real ones. Fred Ward reportedly clashed with the director more than once. Not over dialogue, but over conditions. He hated shooting in soaked fatigues for hours, hated that warm meals were rare, hated that breaks were shorter than the time it took to dry off. At one point, crew members claim he threatened to walk not because he didn't believe in the film, but because the physical cost was stacking too high. Keith Carradine, more reserved by nature, internalized it differently. As the days dragged on, he grew increasingly quiet. Observers noted that he began showing up early, standing alone in costume before shooting, began not to rehearse, but to steel himself. The result on screen is stunning. Their performances aren't polished, they're ragged, shaky, raw, not acted, but endured. And maybe that's why it works, because the story isn't about brave soldiers, it's about panic slowly replacing purpose. And when exhaustion takes hold, even trained men forget which way is out. Fact hash 3. The director denied the metaphor everyone else could see. From the moment Southern Comfort hit screens, the comparisons began. Reviewers and academics alike described it as a thinly veiled critique of the Vietnam War. A group of American men, unfamiliar with the terrain, provoke an enemy they don't understand and suffer for it. The parallels weren't subtle, but the man behind the camera insisted they were coincidental. Walter Hill dismissed the allegory in every interview. "It's not about Vietnam," he said. "It's about survival." And yet, everything about the film seemed to say otherwise. The impotent command structure, the culturally out-of-touch intruders, the inability to distinguish threat from misunderstanding, it all felt pointed. To some cast members, the denial felt like deliberate avoidance. One actor, speaking years later, said, "We weren't making a war film, but we were living inside a story that felt like war." Others defended Hill's stance, saying the director was more interested in primal human behavior than political commentary. But the context of the early 80 seconds couldn't be ignored. Audiences were still processing the trauma of Vietnam. A story about soldiers lost in an unfamiliar landscape, unraveling under pressure, was bound to hit a nerve. And maybe Hill's denial wasn't rejection but strategy. If you refuse to name the metaphor, you let it live in every interpretation, because some wars don't need to be mentioned by name to haunt the frame. Fact #4. The Cajuns were silenced, but that made them louder. They don't talk. They don't explain. They barely even appear. The faceless pursuers in Southern Comfort, the Cajun hunters, remain eerily silent throughout the film. For most viewers, that silence is what makes them terrifying. But the absence wasn't always part of the plan. Early script drafts featured lines for the Cajuns, short exchanges, bits of shouted warnings. Some even had subtitles written in. But as pre-production evolved, Walter Hill began stripping dialogue away, not because of time or budget, because of mood. He wanted the Cajuns not to be people but presence, not villains but consequence. By removing their voices, Hill erased any possibility of negotiation or misunderstanding. There were no terms to discuss, no rules to follow, only actions and silence. The result was a group that didn't feel like characters, but manifestations of judgment. You couldn't reason with them. You couldn't know what they wanted. You couldn't even be sure they were listening. That choice sparked debate on set. Some believed it risked dehumanizing real Cajun communities. Others thought it was brilliant, a way to turn the swamp itself into a living antagonist. In post-production, additional lines were considered, then scrapped. Hill stayed committed to the void, and so the Cajuns became myth, ghosts in the trees, punishment that never speaks its name, because sometimes silence isn't absence, it's design, and it's the sound of everything collapsing. Fact #5. The ending was meant to confuse you, because it confused them too. The final sequence of Southern Comfort feels like it doesn't belong. Two surviving soldiers broken, suspicious, desperate stumble into a Cajun village in the middle of a celebration. Music plays, food sizzles, children dance. No one seems to care who these armed strangers are. It's not peace, it's disorientation. That was the point. Originally, the film was set to end with a brutal confrontation. The surviving guardsmen would face off with the Cajun hunters in a final, bloody sequence. But Hill scrapped it deep into production. Not for pacing, not for budget, but because he believed closure was dishonest. "Real fear doesn't resolve," he once said. "It just stops showing its face." The studio pushed back. Test audiences were divided. Some expected a cathartic fight. Others wanted redemption. Hill gave them neither. Instead, he turned the ending into a swirl of sensory confusion, sound, color, and distrust. The scene was restructured in editing. Dialogue was pulled back. Close-ups were extended. The final cut lingers just long enough for you to feel the tension rising, and then it ends. Some viewers called it artful, others infuriating. But one thing's clear: no one forgets it. Because it doesn't end with a bang. It ends with a question. What if the nightmare never stopped, it just started playing a different song? Fact #6. Fred Ward's pain wasn't in the script, but it made the cut. Fred Ward didn't need a stunt double. Not because the film didn't offer him one, it did, but because he refused. "I don't act like I'm in pain," he once said. "I am." That became uncomfortably true during a particularly intense take where Ward was ordered to run full speed across a slick, muddy bank and fall into shallow water. What no one realized was that the swamp bed had shifted overnight, exposing a jagged piece of submerged wood. Ward landed hard, blood mixed with the mud. His shin had been sliced open, badly enough that the script supervisor asked if they should stop. Ward shook his head. He wrapped the leg himself, not with gauze, but with costume rags, and did the take again. The moment appears in the final film. You can see his grimace, not a performance, a reaction, and that's what makes it hit harder. Not because it's acted well, but because it wasn't acting. Ward never publicly complained. But years later, a crew member recalled his silence between takes. "He wasn't method," the man said. "He was angry, but he gave the camera what it needed." And Hill? He didn't thank him. he just used it. Because in Southern Comfort, the wounds weren't makeup, they were wages. Fact #7, Keith Carradine's calm was a mask and it nearly cracked. On screen, Keith Carradine moves like the last sane man in a collapsing unit. His character is steady, calculated, always a few steps removed from the unraveling. That sense of calm was what Walter Hill wanted, and that's exactly what Carradine gave him until the swamp demanded more than performance. The shoot was brutal on everyone, but Carradine felt the weight differently. While others lashed out, he withdrew. Colleagues later described how he would spend long periods in complete silence between takes, standing barefoot in the mud, breathing slowly through his nose, as if trying to hold something down. It wasn't theatrics. It was survival psychological as much as physical. The breaking point came during a long night sequence on the river. Carradine was supposed to leap from a half-sunken pirogue into cold water, crawl ashore, and deliver a line. Simple, on paper. But the water was colder than expected, and the boat capsized early, plunging him fully under. He came up, eyes locked, mouth tight. He delivered the line. No one said a word. That take is the one used in the final film. You can see it in his body language. From that moment on, his restraint becomes tighter, his pauses longer, his stares more distant. Not crafted, not calculated, real. Because when a performance becomes indistinguishable from a coping mechanism, the line between role and reality dissolves silently. Fact #8, the sound was built to creep under your skin. Literally, when you watch Southern Comfort, it's not the dialogue that stays with you. It's the sounds subtle, buried, creeping into the spaces between scenes. The swamp whistles, the insect clicks, the unnatural quiet that settles just before something goes wrong. That unease was no accident. Alan Splett, the film's sound designer, approached the soundscape like a psychological experiment. He used slowed-down animal sounds layered with reversed whistles. He filtered footsteps through metallic echoes, and in some scenes, he inserted subsonic rumbles, barely audible to the ear, but physically felt in the chest. One example, during the scene where the soldiers begin to suspect they're being followed, there's no music. Instead, Splett placed a low-frequency throb that mimics a heartbeat not from the characters, but from the environment itself. The effect was subliminal. Test audiences reported feeling anxious during scenes where nothing visibly happened. That was the design. The swamp wasn't just background, it was active, oppressive, alive. Splett later said in a rare interview, "If I've done my job right, they won't notice anything. They'll just feel wrong." Mission accomplished. Because horror doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just hums deep in your spine. Fact #9. They shot in a biohazard zone and didn't say a word. Location scouts found a stretch of Louisiana swamp that looked perfect, isolated, atmospheric. Still, what they didn't mention or didn't know was that part of the area had recently been under quarantine for a livestock bacterial outbreak. The official signs had been removed, the paperwork cleared, but the locals knew better. One crew member recalled being warned by a fisherman, "Don't drink the water, don't eat the fish, don't even let your dog swim in it." But the production moved forward anyway. Within 48 hours, crew members began showing symptoms: nausea, rashes, dizziness. A camera operator collapsed on set. An actor developed a rash that spread from his neck to his ribs. Quietly, the medical team issued bottled water to all cast. Swimming scenes were revised to minimize immersion, but they kept filming. Walter Hill didn't acknowledge the issue publicly. To the studio, everything was on schedule, but the footage from that location has a strange quality. The air looks thick. The actors seem distant. Even the color palette shifts slightly grayer, more suffocating. And maybe that's coincidence. Or maybe the environment, sick and silent, left its mark on more than just the crew. Sometimes, the most dangerous thing in a horror film isn't what chases you, it's what you can't see and what no one tells you about. Fact #0, Powers Booth took the role everyone else turned down. The role of Hardin wasn't supposed to be heroic, it was meant to be unsettling. He's the outsider, the skeptic, the man who keeps watching as others lose their grip. It's a role that requires quiet power and emotional distance. That kind of character isn't easy to cast. Several actors passed on the part. Some cited the harsh location, others didn't want to play someone so morally ambiguous. One agent reportedly told the producers, "My client's not standing knee-deep in gator piss for a paycheck." But Powers Booth said yes. At the time, Booth was riding the wave of acclaim from Guyana Tragedy, where he'd played cult leader Jim Jones. That role had already proven he could inhabit dangerous silences, and Hill wanted that edge. Booth didn't warm up to the crew. He didn't crack jokes between takes. He showed up, listened, and worked. Castmates described him as intense but fair. One grip said, He wasn't acting like he was on the edge. He was already standing there. His presence in Southern Comfort is magnetic because it never asks for attention. In a cast of loud breakdowns, he whispers, and it makes you lean in. The irony? His performance was overlooked at the time. Critics focused on the metaphor, the direction, the chaos. But go back now, decades later, and you'll see it. The film doesn't move around him, it collapses into him. Quietly, relentlessly, unavoidably, fact Hassonon. The fog almost killed the shot and the crew. The swamp mist in Southern Comfort doesn't just create mood, it erases visibility. It makes the bayou feel like purgatory. But when the natural fog failed to show up during a week of dry shooting, the crew brought in machines to fake it. That's when things got dangerous. They used industrial foggers powered by gas generators and fog juice not meant for the swamp's humidity. At first, it worked. The haze looked real. The atmosphere turned heavy, opaque, ominous. But then, the fog began sticking to the camera lenses. It coated lights. Worst of all, it began collecting inside the generator housings. One generator overheated and burst into a small fireball. A nearby assistant was nearly caught in the flames, only saved by a quick-thinking gaffer with a fire extinguisher. Filming stopped for the rest of the day. The crew stood in silence as smoke, real this time, drifted into the trees. Hill was unfazed. He ordered the fog machines back the next morning, with minor adjustments. The result? The film's most haunting scenes are bathed in this artificial haze made of chemicals, stress, and nearly combustible tension. Because atmosphere doesn't come free. Sometimes it burns. Fact Hasson 2. Marketing turned the film into something it wasn't placed. When Southern Comfort wrapped, it was a quiet, disturbing piece about escalation and loss. But when it hit theaters, audiences expected explosions. Why? Because that's how it was sold. The trailers were cut like a war film. The posters featured men with guns, mid-stride, mid-yell. Taglines shouted things like, "Not everyone who went in came out." It looked like Rambo in a swamp. It wasn't. Viewers who bought tickets expecting action got dread instead. They sat through long silences, creeping tension, quiet deaths, and an ending that offered no answers. Many left the theater confused. Some felt cheated. Others just didn't know what they'd seen. Walter Hill was livid. He claimed the studio hijacked the soul of the film for the sake of a sellable campaign. The marketing team never apologized. They had numbers to hit, and Southern Comfort, as it was, didn't fit neatly into any genre. That mismatch hurt its box office and its legacy. For years, people remembered it as the slow action movie, not the psychological thriller it actually was. Only recently, through retrospectives and reevaluation, has its true nature emerged. Because misrepresenting a film doesn't just change how it's sold, it changes what people think it was allowed to be. Fact Hasson 3. A death wasn't in the script until it happened by accident. Not all the character deaths in Southern Comfort were planned. One of them, subtle, abrupt, unexplained, was the direct result of something going wrong on set. During the shoot for a crossing sequence involving a narrow, moss-covered log, one of the supporting actors lost his balance and fell into the swamp. The camera was rolling. The crew rushed in. He wasn't hurt, not physically. But when Hill watched the playback, something clicked. The fall looked real, unstaged, vulnerable. More importantly, it felt right for the story. That night, Hill rewrote the structure. The character would now disappear between scenes. No dramatic farewell, no screams, no closure, just gone. Like a casualty of confusion swallowed by nature and never spoken of again. The actor was blindsided. He'd built his performance toward a payoff that would never come. Some said he was furious. Others said he just went quiet. The footage was kept. The story absorbed the absence. Today, unless you're watching closely, you may not even realize someone's missing. But once you do, it becomes impossible to forget. Because sometimes, the most terrifying death isn't the violent one. It's the one no one notices. Fact Hasson 4. The music was real then turned inside out. That final village scene plays like a hallucination. Bright colors, warm light, laughter and Cajun music fill the air. But there's something wrong with it. Something you can't quite place. That unease isn't accidental. It was engineered. The musicians were real local. Cajun players brought in to perform traditional folk songs live on set. The atmosphere during filming was genuine. Dancing, clapping, celebration. But when the footage hit post-production, sound designer Alan Splett didn't treat the recordings as ambiance. He treated them as material to be dissected. He slowed down the tapes, shifted pitch, reversed sections, layered them with barely perceptible atonal drones. The joyful melodies stayed recognizable, but only just. They hovered on the edge of distortion, like a memory collapsing into itself. One track was altered so subtly that viewers reported feeling off without realizing why. That was exactly the goal. The music became a mask, a facade of peace over something rotten underneath, because sometimes horror doesn't scream at you, it smiles and keeps playing. Fact Hasson 5. The film was quietly banned without explanation. While Southern Comfort was never a mainstream success in the US, it drew critical interest abroad. But in at least one country, which remains officially unnamed, the film was rejected for distribution. The reasoning? Incompatible thematic tone with current political climate. That was the only explanation given. Speculation points to either France or the Philippines. Both had complex relationships with military narratives at the time. Some believe the ban was driven by the film's portrayal of undisciplined soldiers unraveling in foreign terrain. Others say it was the political ambiguity, the fact that it could be read as a condemnation of authority or of foreign occupation, depending on your lens. Walter Hill never commented directly. When asked in an interview about censorship, he replied, "If your film gets banned, it probably touched something that wasn't dead yet." The ban was eventually lifted, but by then, it no longer mattered. The film had built its legacy elsewhere in whispers, reappraisals, and side-channel releases. Ironically, the country that silenced it may have understood it better than anyone else, because some stories aren't rejected for what they say, but for what they let others say about the world we live in. Fact Hashanexis. His character was supposed to survive until he didn't. Story arcs are sacred to actors. They anchor the chaos of production. They provide trajectory, motivation, a reason for every reaction. So when one cast member in Southern Comfort was told he would survive, he shaped his performance around it. From tentative uncertainty to hardened resolve, he was building something, until the script changed without warning. Midway through production, his character was quietly written out, not killed in action, not given a heroic farewell, simply removed. One scene he's there, the next he's not. No one in the story even mentions it. The decision came from Walter Hill, who reportedly felt the story was cleaner without the resolution. "War stories don't always close loops," he allegedly said. "Sometimes people just don't come back." The actor was devastated. Years later, he called it the most honest betrayal of my career. And that honesty, that sense of abandonment, somehow made the film feel more authentic. Because in real chaos, people vanish. No explanation, no legend, just a name on a clipboard that never made it back. And when fiction mirrors that kind of disappearance, it stops feeling like a movie. It starts feeling like memory. Fact Hasson 7, their uniforms were rotting, literally. The mud-caked fatigues seen in Southern Comfort weren't distressed by a costume designer. They were falling apart all on their own. To achieve a realistic look, the production sourced actual National Guard uniforms from southern U.S. military surplus depots. What they got were garments that had sat in forgotten storage for years, some water-damaged, others riddled with mold, others still with evidence of insect nests in the lining. Actors complained of skin rashes. One refused to wear his issued boots after discovering fungus growing inside. Another claimed a uniform smelled like a wet grave. The wardrobe team attempted to disinfect what they could, but Hill reportedly insisted the deterioration be preserved. They need to look like they've been out here too long. Because they have. There was no comfort in costume. The decay you see on screen is real. The dampness, the stiffness, the slow collapse of the stitching. It wasn't design. It was entropy, rolling through the wardrobe like a second character. And when the clothes you wear feel like they're decomposing, it changes how you stand, how you speak, how you survive. Fact Hasson 8. That fire wasn't a special effect, it was a close call. Lighting failures are common in swamp environments. Water, heat, bugs, they ruin even the most well-prepared rigs. So when the production found themselves without electricity for a night shoot deep in the bayou, they turned to the most primitive tool they had, fire. For one pivotal scene, the discovery of a mutilated body, Hill wanted flickering torchlight. It would be atmospheric, raw, visceral. The crew soaked rags in kerosene and mounted them on poles. The actors held live flame as they moved through waist-deep grass. It looked incredible, until one torch slipped. It landed in a patch of dry reeds. Flames jumped, fast and hot. The crew froze for a beat too long. Then someone leapt in with a blanket and smothered it. No one was hurt, but the fear stayed with them. Hill watched the playback. That specific take, the one where the actors flinch, just briefly, is the one he used. You can see it if you know where to look. A flash of something real behind the eyes. A beat too fast. A silence that wasn't in the script. That's not tension, that's instinct. And sometimes, it burns just long enough to make the scene work. Fact has sononine, the scene was cut because it was too real, but for the wrong reason. There was a scene that pushed one actor to his emotional limit. A breakdown sequence him, alone, shouting into the fog, firing blanks into empty space, then collapsing to his knees. Hill loved it. The crew was silent after the take. It felt like something deep and dangerous had surfaced. Then came the test screening. The audience laughed. It wasn't mockery. It was discomfort misinterpreted as absurdity. The sobbing, the erratic shooting. It read as over the top. Hill was livid. He didn't blame the actor. He blamed tone his own. The moment hadn't been earned yet, and the cut hit too early. So he removed it entirely. The actor was crushed. That scene had cost him emotionally and physically. He'd built his performance around that eruption. Now it was gone. But Hill's reasoning was cold and simple. The minute the audience feels safe enough to laugh, you've lost control. The footage was shelved. It has never been released. No bootlegs, no deleted scenes, just a ghost in the edit. And that's the irony. The performance was too real to be understood, too raw to be accepted. Because horror doesn't always fail when it's fake. Sometimes it fails when it's honest. Fact #20. The title was a lie, and that was the point. The original title wasn't Southern Comfort, it was The Enemy. Brutal, ambiguous, direct, but no one could agree who that referred to. Was it the locals, the environment, the chain of command, themselves? The lack of clarity became a problem for marketing. Executives pushed for a title with warmth, familiarity, something that could be packaged. They landed on Southern Comfort, borrowed from a whiskey bottle seen early in the film. Hill reportedly hated it. "It sounds like a holiday special," he quipped in an interview. "This movie is a fever dream, not a drink." But the studio got its way. Ironically, the title worked better than anyone realized. Southern Comfort evokes exactly what the film isn't. It creates an expectation of relief, of gentleness, of ease, and then it spends every minute tearing that expectation apart. By the end, the phrase feels weaponized, a soft lie draped over brutal truth. Because sometimes, the most dangerous thing isn't what's waiting in the woods, it's the false comfort you brought with you. Bonus fact: he was in the squad. Until he wasn't. In ensemble films, continuity is everything. Faces are tracked, movements are mapped, but in Southern Comfort, if you look closely, something strange happens. One of the soldiers vanishes. Not in a blaze of violence, not with a scream. He's simply gone. There's no scene explaining his absence. No body. No one calls his name. It's as if he evaporated between shots, a ghost story told by bad continuity. But it wasn't a mistake. It was a decision. Midway through filming, the actor left the production. Illness, scheduling, or something more complicated, no one talks about it publicly. Walter Hill didn't rewrite the script. He didn't even try to patch the gap. Instead, he leaned into the omission. The disappearance remains. It's not dramatic. It's not stylized. It just is. And that's what makes it effective. Because in a film about disorientation, about men being picked apart by forces they don't understand, what could be more unsettling than a missing person who no one seems to miss? It becomes thematic absence without reaction. Erasure without grief. Most viewers never notice, but the moment you do, you start questioning everything. Who else was here? Who else might vanish? And what does it mean when a story moves on? Like you were never part of it. Because in Southern Comfort, dying is one thing. Being forgotten is worse. You don't walk out of Southern Comfort feeling satisfied. You crawl out damp, disoriented, and wondering what you just survived. These weren't just weird facts. They were fractures in a film that never pretended to be whole. From vanishing actors to silenced metaphors, from blood in the water to silence in the sound mix, this wasn't a movie made to be liked. It was made to be endured. Now it's your turn to speak. Which part of this story do you think was intentional, and which part was just chaos pretending to be control? Leave your thoughts below, and subscribe for more truths that were never meant to surface.